Everybody, and welcome to our WICOR Part 1 training. My name is Dr. Stephanie Bain de los Santos, and I work at Texas A&M University Kingsville in Kingsville, Texas, where I serve as the AVID liaison as well as a lecturer.
Hi, and I'm Nicole Morris. I'm also a lecturer at Texas A&M University Kingsville, where I teach communications and journalism, and at one point worked with Stephanie in the Center for Student Success.
WICOR stands for Writing, Inquiry, Collaboration, Organization, and Reading.
And in today's Part 1, we will focus on writing and inquiry. And what's great about the high-impact practices we are going to share with you today is that you can use them in your face-to-face classrooms as well as in your online classroom.
So stay tuned for the first part of WICOR, as well as look for our second part that we should have posted soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
As we said earlier, in part 1 of WICOR training, we are going to be focusing on just the writing and the inquiry in this part of the training.
So this is something, we went ahead and left this in, even though this is an online training, but this is a great way to get to know your students. You could also modify this to be an online training or lesson that day. You would just, instead of a tree tent, you could have them do it in their group chat. So tree tent's a really great activity. I have loaded, we put a video at the bottom, which we can also put in the notes on the YouTube that you can check out. Jonathan Grant Brown. It's a very positive video to get your students going for class.
And I would like to add, Stephanie, that it's also a very good video for any teachers at any level
Absolutely.
To watch, because
Yes.
it really brings home, this video and Jonathan Grant Brown sharing his backstory of his life, it really brings home the importance an educator has and the importance and the influence you can have on a student's life. So it's not only good for your students to encourage them, but it's also good for teachers to watch this. And just as a reminder, because we all know how important our roles are, but just as a reminder just how much you can impact a student's life.
That's awesome.
So here is something that you wouldn't necessarily use in class, but you could use the setup of this in class for any question you like. For as our training here, though, what we want you to do is to take a moment and think, what makes an effective teacher, right? And as you do this exercise, we want you to think of, okay, what makes me a good teacher, but also what do you think your students want from an effective and a good teacher, right? So it's always good to place yourself in your students, from your students' point of view as you move forward with this activity.
So what does WICOR stand for? WICOR stands for Writing, Inquiry, Collaboration, Organization, and Reading, and is a collection of teaching and learning strategies that guide students in comprehending concepts and articulating ideas at increasingly complex levels. WICOR strategies support student learning in any classroom on campus. Something to be noted, you might have heard of high-impact practices or best practices. This is also what WICOR stands for.
So writing is an important tool that all students need to develop. Students need to learn how to communicate well, both orally as well as in the written word. And so it's very important to focus on incorporating writing in all of your lessons. It's a learning tool, right, as well as a communication tool. In fact, most employers today are looking for graduates who can communicate well in writing, right? And it's a way to encourage them as far as to record their thoughts on a lesson, for example. It's a learning tool.
I think a lot of times with text talk and the way that people communicate today is that many times that transition from, saying something or thinking something to writing it out is just lost. So the more we can have them writing, it doesn't matter what subject it is, the better off the students will be, and the better they're going to begin to do in your classroom and others' classrooms.
Right.
So students who write consider audience and purpose Engage in various writing processes to address specific situations, support their thinking, and demonstrate understanding.
And I think on this list, Stephanie, demonstrating understanding is probably the most important thing. You want to make sure that the information that you want them to absorb, that they're understanding it the way you intended it to be understood, especially if it's something that's like a base knowledge that they have to build on.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to look at some high impact practices, some techniques that you can do very quickly in your classroom, and like Stephanie said, any type of course that you're teaching,
any course,
to ensure that your students are in fact absorbing your information.
So these are the types of different activities you might have a student do. You might recognize these, especially if you teach English. A pre-write, draft, read a response, revise, edit, and publish and reflect. But this is something we also need to be teaching in every classroom, just to get them going with these high impact practices and learning at that higher level. So writing to learn. Cornell note-taking, and maybe in another session Nicole and I can demonstrate a Cornell note-taking for you. It's a wonderful way for students to, if they're not used to taking their own notes, this is a great baby steps on how to get them there. Quick writes and reflections. So we're going to talk about a quick write today, give you an example. Learning logs, peer evaluation, and authentic writing. These are just very, very few examples of how you can incorporate writing into your classroom. So writing to learn. You want to capture the idea that writing is not only a communication skill learned in English language arts, but also a learning skill that can deepen understanding of any academic subject or life experience. So writing to learn, AVID has, and AVID is Advancement via Individual Determination. It's a nonprofit, which if you want to think about it, has been traditionally K-12, but over the past 9 years or so, it's evolved to be in higher ed, and it really is a great way for teachers to learn how to do strategies, professional developments. AVID offers a ton of professional developments to help with your everyday classroom. So AVID's developed a series of strategies for integrating writing into a variety of learning situations, including assignments that can be as brief as a minute paper or as demanding as a research paper. And writing and reading are both the anchor to WICOR.
Which is important, right, that you incorporate this in your classrooms, because as Stephanie alluded to earlier, students are more familiar with just texting one another, and they have that textese language, and they often struggle to write appropriately at the level they should be writing at, particularly once they get into college. And so that's why, you know, WICOR focuses on reading and writing as the bookends, right, of WICOR, because they go hand in hand and they are so important for the inquiry, collaboration, and organization. You have to have those anchors of writing and reading. Absolutely.
So this is an example of a quick write. If this were face-to-face or even in a synchronous online session, you could do this asynchronous, but if you want it to be interactive, synchronous. So this quick write is an effective way for students to recall and understand what they know, and you're having them engage in a brief writing exercise. Something else you want to know about a quick write is it's very informal, so you can tell them that, hey, I'm not picking this up to necessarily check for grammar. I really want this to be your reflection, your own reflection, and then after that, you know, we can go back, edit, you can share what you've written and things like that.
Right. So for this purpose of a quick write, you're wanting to capture their ideas and to prove that they have an understanding of the material. And like Steph said, you don't want them to get bogged down with writing, worrying about, is this a complete sentence? Did I spell that right? You want it to be like a free write that they do quickly.
Absolutely.
And this kind of goes with that. So you don't want the quick write to be threatening. So you want to take that pressure off the student and not having to worry about such things, right, as their spelling and their sentence structure. It's a short response, right? And so you're really just trying to stimulate that thought process to get the ideas flowing in their head. And I think if you give them that instruction right off the top, hey, maybe this isn't for a grade, or hey, it's all right if you misspell something. I am more interested in what you know or what your understanding is on this topic than I am about whether or not you can spell that word correctly.
Yeah.
Right. And that really will calm the students down.
Yeah.
And then it'll be a much more rewarding activity.
Yes. So here's the example that we are showing you or going to expose you to today, but you make it exactly how you would like it. So the quick write topic is virtual learning. And what does an engaging virtual classroom look like to you? So it would be 7 minutes that we would give you an opportunity to write down everything you can think about, right? And if you wanted to be like, man, 7 minutes is kind of long, you could do 2, you could do 3 minutes, and then break them up into groups. So if this was online in our SMS system, Blackboard Collaborate, we would do breakout groups where you can very easily in the settings of Blackboard Collaborate break up students into different groups and then have them automatically sent to those groups and have them discuss like that, and then bring them back to one large group.
Right.
But this is just an example, and it's very nice in a face-to-face.
Oh, and it's very nice in a face-to-face, and it does work on an online session. I use something like this in online classes, particularly with like my journalism classes. Like you wouldn't think that how would I apply this to a journalism class? Well, I'll break them up into groups, and I'll say take a few minutes and try to determine how you would approach this story topic, right? So my question is, how would you approach writing a story about COVID-19 today, right? That's just a general example. Put it on in breakout groups so they would discuss amongst themselves, make some notes to themselves, then share, and then come back together as a whole classroom, and you can use like your whiteboard to record their responses. So you can easily do it in just about any subject. So inquiry, of course, is uncovering somebody's understanding and getting them to ask those critical questions or think of those critical questions, and encourage your students to engage in this higher level thinking to ensure that they're learning correctly, and then also that they're able to discuss their thoughts and put them into words and be able to share their ideas with the rest of their peers.
Yes, and I think probably one of the things that teachers and faculty members, instructors don't do is ask those very critical questions. And one of the ways you can do this is prep high impact or high level questions for when you go into the classroom, because I know when we go into the classroom sometimes we're busy, we get sidetracked, and if you have your questions that you want to ask laid out, it's so much more organic to keep these students focused, and you make sure that they're getting exactly what they need out of this class.
I like that word, organic, right? And the students can tell, like, when you're kind of laid back and you're prepared, and if you're not so tense and stressed and worried about what am I doing today, you know, then they won't be either.
They're like smelling blood in the water.
Something like
sharks.
that. Yeah.
So students who inquire, analyze, and synthesize materials or ideas, clarify their own thinking, probe others' thinking, and work through ambiguity.
Right. So there are lots of course, activities that you can do in your classroom to promote this inquiry with your students and to get them thinking at higher levels, right? Skilled questionings, COSTA's levels of thinking, which I think is what we're going to get into today, Socratic seminars, guided questions, philosophical chairs. We will be having some future videos where we are actually going to be in a model classroom,
yes,
showing you a lot of these skills and how you would put them into practice. But this is the purpose of inquiry. You want the students to be able to think at a higher level and ask those probing questions.
Absolutely. So you may have seen this before, Bloom's taxonomy, which I think is a great representation of where we are most of the time with our students and where we want to be. So if you look at the very bottom, the largest category is knowledge. We really do focus on a lot of knowledge, right? We want them to define and describe and identify, and then comprehension, and then application. But the reality is many of us we never get past application. Some of your students may not ever make it past knowledge, but that top level, those high impact practices, that learning where we want to have them at the highest level of learning, we've got to get them to evaluation. And by utilizing high impact practice strategies, or best practices as you may have heard of them called as well, is to make sure that we have critical questions and be prepared for class.
Right. So COSTA's levels of inquiry, there are 3 levels. Unlike Bloom's, which has 6, COSTA's has 3. Level 1 is kind of where most students kind of sit, where they just they can define something, they can recall information from the book, you know, they can name something, describe something, but not much more than that. But from that, though, you can build to the level 2, where they start making sense of information, right? So maybe they're able to combine 2 different concepts as they understand it and can compare them. They can do some criticizing and critical thinking at this point, right? Be able to support their answer. But a lot of this still comes from the text itself, and not necessarily from their own thought process, which is where we want to get, which is level 3, where they apply and evaluate the information. So they take all the information they've gathered from level 1 and level 2, from their textbook or from your lecture, and then they can then, using their own knowledge, evaluate that information so that maybe they can make predictions, or they can answer a question for you, but back it up with their own justifications, right? So they can assess information better. So then at the level 3, of course, they then get to evaluate and can do true measurements, not based just on the information from the text or the lecture, but pulling from their own knowledge and be able to make their own assessments and predictions.
Absolutely, and this is where it goes back to instructors making sure you are creating those questions that are really tailored to where you want your students to be.
So this is just a little practice video you can watch for yourself to try to write those different levels of questions for a student. So if you played a video like this to your students and you want to have a discussion afterwards, you need to be able to model some of these different types of questions that you want to ask your students. So the idea here is to watch this video and then write out yourself different levels of questions, right? So a level 1 question is just recalling something from the video, right? Level 2 is recalling also, but being able to combine like 2 or 3 different points from the video, but the answers still can be found in the video. Whereas the level 3 question that you might ask your students after a lecture or watching a video would be them having to make their own opinion or justification. So they can't find the answer just by watching the video. They have to put some thought behind it. So this is something that you can practice with yourself, to watch this video. And it's about parents and students discussing college amidst virtual learning that we all found ourselves in since last spring. So that brings us to the end of part 1 Thank you for listening. We will have part 2 of WICOR coming up next. Collaboration, organization, and reading.
Thank you.